What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome back for those of you who have followed the show before on different platforms. I'll get into the reason why I say that here in just a second, but welcome to the Jim Bratton Podcast. It has been a very long time, as some of you know, since I've been able to come on and do a show, and there are various reasons for that. For those of you who were keeping up to date with me on the Spotify platform, for some reason Spotify, it got harder to sort of upload content, I guess, because they decided to change their settings in some way. I don't really know, but once it did get a little bit more difficult, and eventually I was going to start putting more and more content on YouTube anyway, but I just decided if Spotify, if it's going to be harder to upload content on Spotify, then why not give the YouTube avenue a shot? And so that is exactly what I'm going to be doing. For those of you who are keeping up to date on the Facebook Live show right now, as you can see in the description, eventually I'm going to hopefully get around to posting this version of the show, the sort of rebooted version of the show, to the YouTube channel in due time. And so be sure to stay tuned for that. And of course, a lot of you may be wondering, what am I going to be getting into today on this I'm calling it episode 1 of the rebooted version of the show. What am I going to be getting into, you might ask? Well, I'm not even going to bother trying getting into all of the stuff that I missed in the last however long it has been since I've been neglecting to get on. I would sort of give myself headaches if I were going to try to do that. But, and of course, I may end up as the, of course, new season of the show goes. The new season of the Jim Bratton Podcast goes, I'm going to, of course, get into little tidbits of sort of relitigating the past, in due time. But what am I going to be getting into today, you might ask? Well, since the since training camp is back in the National Football League, and since the Tennessee Titans have, of course, gotten back into the groove of training camp, so to speak, and since the preseason opener for the Tennessee Titans is going to be taking place this coming Saturday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I figured what better way to get back into the grind of the show than by sort of breaking down what I've seen from training camp, what I hope to see from the Tennessee Titans as training camp continues, and maybe I'm also going to be getting into some hot takes on the show today, in addition to what some of the major storylines were and are in training camp, mainly as it pops off the top of my head the Will Levis shoulder situation, and of course the Traylon Burks collarbone situation, and unfortunately that involves me sort of having to rehash that trade, which that trade, the Traylon Burks AJ Brown debacle of a trade. It almost pains me that I'm gonna have to get into talking about it, but now that the trade has been concluded in many ways, I sort of gave that term to it in my little preview of today's show. And for those of you on the Facebook Live audience, you will of course know that I gave a preview of the show in which I sort of went into how bad of a trade it was, how absolutely terrible of a move it was for the Tennessee Titans. And I even went as far as comparing it to a couple of things, not just the Herschel Walker trade, that of course being the real life comparison, but also I sort of alluded to a fantasy football trade that I made, in which the ramifications of that trade were not very good for me, but definitely turned out to be very good for my trading partner as it relates to that situation. But I'm not going to start off with that, but although I will be getting into that in much greater detail as the show progresses here. But I suppose what I am going to start off with today is the number 1 overall pick in the draft of this past April's draft. That, of course, being Cam Ward. Although based on first of all, the Madden rating, the abysmal Madden rating, and of course I know not too much stock needs to be put into Madden ratings whatsoever, but the abysmal Madden rating of the number 1 overall pick in the draft, Cam Ward, 71. That's right, you did hear me correctly. The number 1 overall pick in the 2025 draft has been given a ranking of 71 in the upcoming Madden 2026 video game. And of course, based on, and not to take away from any other pick in that draft, because, for example, Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from the New York Giants, who was taken just 2 spots below Cam Ward, if I'm not mistaken, was given an overall ranking of 81, which, props to Abdul Carter for that in many ways. But the fact of the matter is that under normal circumstances, Cam Ward would be given the benefit of the doubt for, I don't know, being the number 1 overall pick in the draft. But on the other hand, it should also come as no surprise that Cam Ward was given a 71 overall ranking on Madden based on who he was drafted by, unfortunately, as much as it pains me to say that as a Tennessee Titans fan. But it's just the world we live in. I mean, what can you really say at the end of the day? And again, as much as it pains me to say that as a Tennessee Titans fan, it is just the reality of the situation. And of course, having said that, I'm gonna sort of brush off all the talk about the Tennessee Titans and how abysmal they were last year. And of course, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, this is just one of the things that I may get into later, but am not even going to bother getting into today, mainly because of how bad the team was last year. But here's something that I am going to be getting into. I am going to be getting into the fact that everything that I've seen from Cam Ward throughout training camp, other than the sort of quote unquote mid practices that the team has been having, which is of course something that Cam Ward has been saying, and of course mainly for the younger generation that listens not just to this show, but pretty much any other show that's out there as it relates to, well, really not even sports, but really just about anything in terms of media today and TV and whatnot. I don't think I need to explain to you what the term mid means. But having said that, I would rather get the mid practices out of the way in the preseason than I would week 8 or 9 of the regular season. I would much rather have that be the case. But aside from all of the quote unquote mid practices that I've seen, everything that I've heard and have been seeing from Cam Ward has been nothing but positive. The command that he's taken of the offense, for example, the fact that he shows up to work at 4:30 a.m. every day, the fact that it's gotten to the point where allegedly they're having to quote unquote kick this man out of the building based on how early he shows up to work every day, and just the cohesion that he's wanting to develop with these receivers, which I will get into a little bit more in detail of what I expect from those receivers as we move into camp. I'll be getting into that a little bit later on in the show. But the relationship and the rapport that he's been building with Calvin Ridley in particular, another guy, veteran guy, who was brought in to try to get the most out of Will Levis last year. He was sort of the big free agent acquisition that the Titans made last year. That, of course, as it relates to getting the most out of Will Levis, that, of course, did not end up materializing, unfortunately. But having said that, the Titans were obviously of the mindset of let's try it again with Cam Ward. And you've got to you've got to like the rapport that he is developing with Cam Ward, and that the rapport that Cam Ward is also developing with Tyler Lockett, another veteran pickup that this team made this year in the offseason, picking him up on a one-year deal. And as I said, I will get into the receiver battles a little bit later on in the show. But in addition to the rapport that's been set up with Cam Ward and his various weapons, you've obviously got to like a lot of the hype that goes into the Titans having selected Cam Ward. And the one thing that stands out to me in particular, the one thing about Cam Ward that stands out to me in particular is that the fact that, of course, Cam Ward coming from the University of Miami, where he not only broke, but really shattered all of the U's passing records in his 1 year at Miami. Of course, a lot of people take notice of that, and one of the people that took notice of that was former Miami cornerback Gino Torretta, when he was on John Gruden's podcast on the Barstool Network. I guess it was John Gruden's podcast or some interview that Gino Torretta was doing with John Gruden at the FFCA, as they call it. But Gino Torretta, basically, I cannot remember exactly what he said, and I am paraphrasing here the words of Gino Torretta, which, if anybody knows anything about the University of Miami and the history behind playing with the U on their helmet, it is, of course, somebody who has worn the U on their helmet. And Gino Torretta basically said, look, Cam Ward, he's the real deal, guys. And when you turn on the tape and see the athleticism, the arm strength, the precision and timing that he had, and I'll get into the has a little bit more in particular at the end of the show, because one of those receivers from the U has in fact joined Cam Ward in Nashville, Xavier Restrepo. But when you look at all of that, you begin to see why Cam Ward is in the words of Gino Torretta, and we are, of course, going to see if this is going to be the case or not as we get into Cam Ward's tenure as QB1 for the Titans. But for a former Miami quarterback who has worn the U on his helmet, has done very well for himself in the world of college football in particular, for him to come out and say that, I think speaks a lot about the potential of a Cam Ward. And speaking of that potential, the one thing that I will say about Cam Ward, and this is really not even a shot at Cam specifically, but just for me as a Titans fan, and of course, with your team having the number 1 overall pick on the roster, you of course begin begin to become accustomed to hearing a lot of noise about that. And some of the noise that I have been hearing is the Steve McNair comparisons. Of course, Cam Ward has been compared to Steve McNair, not just from the on the field standpoint, but also from the intangibles and the leadership and the off the field standpoint as well. And I sort of wish that the brakes would be pumped a little bit on those comparisons, mainly because as a Tennessee Titans fan, I do not want them to be wrong, and frankly hope that they are right in many ways. And that's probably going to be the reason why I am not going to make those comparisons on this show, because I really want them to be right, you know. It'd be nice to win some football games after all. But and of course, at the end of the day, I cannot control the things that sports media says. I cannot control what sort of memes the meme makers make. I cannot control any of the other outside noise that protrudes itself as it relates to Cam Ward. But the one thing I can say is that I hope that all of this noise turns out translating into reality, because knock on wood, it would be nice to finally have a franchise quarterback once again. And it seems like we've been saying this really, and this, of course, this is another reason why the Steve McNair comparisons pop up, because we've seen this before with guys that the Tennessee Titans have drafted, whether it be Vince Young, whether it be Jay Clocker, whether it be Marcus Mariota, whether it be, of course, the guy that I'm going to get into here in just a second more in detail, Will Levis. We've seen this movie play over and over and over again, and of course, frankly, Titans fans are a little bit tired of watching it in many ways. I know I certainly am. But there's a little bit more hope, I think, this time around that Cam Ward is going to end up being, quote unquote, the guy in Nashville. And of course, many Tennessee Titans fans are hoping, especially with the team moving into that new stadium in just a couple of seasons from now, in the 2027 season, I believe, is when they're supposed to move into the new Nissan Stadium that Cam Ward, the hope is that he is going to be the guy leading the team not just into 2025 and 2027, but also hopefully into 2035 and 2037 as well. But on that note, I'm going to turn the page in this edition of the Jim Bratton podcast. And speaking of things that we are turning the page on, I guess we can go ahead and talk about Will Levis, who luckily for me and my eyes, I've not seen any more, and I'm sure he's posted some more Instagram stories here lately, but the last reason I bring that up and the reason I phrase it like this is because the last Instagram story of Will Levis's that I did see, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I don't think I've ever seen what, and of course, I'm not a doctor by any means, but I don't think I've ever seen what a separated shoulder looks like. But if the last Instagram story of Will Levis that I saw was indeed, and of course, the caption was, of course, something along the lines of last day with this little guy, or something like that, but it was a picture of what we can all assume was a separated shoulder. And of course, as I've just stated, I'm very much not a doctor, but if that was in fact a picture of a separated shoulder, then it's just hard to look at in many ways. But Will Levis, due to that separated shoulder injury, that of course has generated many conspiracy theories, and of course I'm not going to get into any of the conspiracy theories about this, other than to say there have been plenty of conspiracy theories about this that have been put out by people that probably know a little bit more about the Will Levis situation than me. And of course, that know Will Levis personally, that have that advantage over me, because I would love to meet him, but as of this moment in time, I've not had the privilege of meeting Mr. Levis. And obviously you hate to see this type of injury happen to anyone. And of course, the one thing I will say is that I wish Will nothing but the best as he begins the rehab process. And I of course say that whether Will Levis would have gone into this season as QB1 or not, which is of course not going to be the case in reality. But the one thing that I will say about the conspiracy theories, quote unquote, on the base level is that, the questions are being asked, is this Will Levis's way of, quote unquote, quitting on the team? Could he have had surgery in January when the injury first took place, or at least closer to the time when it took place, rather than wait until the middle of July to, in fact, have the surgery? Is this more of Will Levis making more of a business decision than an actual football decision? Blah, 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 blah. I'm not even going to bother getting into all of that because of the aforementioned reasons that I gave. But the one thing that I will say about Will Levis is that this is not how I or any Titans fan wanted to see this play out, because it seems based on what we have seen in the grand scheme of things, based on Will Levis's tenure as QB1 with the Titans, that we should have known that this is how it was going to play out, because when you turn on the tape of Will Levis at Kentucky, there were definitely some red flags. The inability to read a defense, obviously the turnovers, which at the time made me very happy to watch as a Tennessee Volunteers fan, when he had not one, not two, but 3 interceptions at least against it may have actually been 4 interceptions. I do not really have the box score from that game in front of me, mainly because I was trying to move past my Tennessee fandom in a way and wanted to embrace Will Levis as a member of the Tennessee Titans. But it's funny, the things that you choose to ignore, you know. But at the end of the day, we probably should not have ignored the red flags as it relates to Will Levis. And, you know, you hate to see anybody get hurt. You hate to see anybody deal with shoulder pain that and again, I'm just saying what the theories are. I'm not going to get into any specifics. I'm not trying to put on my tinfoil hat at all, but someone who probably could have had the surgery a little bit sooner. You hate to see anybody dealing with that sort of pain and those sorts of issues. And of course, as I've already gotten into, I of course wish Will nothing but the best as he begins and continues his rehab. But at the end of the day, there is probably a better chance than not that this was going to be the way the Will Levis saga ended in Nashville. And it's really just unfortunate that is the case, but we now have to deal with the fact that that is probably going to be the case. And I know that Will Levis has been the subject of trade talks previously in the offseason. Obviously, I would think that is not going to materialize now in 2025. We may very much be revisiting this in 2026, but until that time, I would assume that Will Levis is going to be placed on the season-ending injured reserve list, and the Cam Ward era is, like we didn't already assume that it was going to be the case when we picked him at number 1 overall. The Cam Ward, and I say we, I mean obviously the Titans, can't let go of my fandom in many ways once I get on a roll. But we can very much assume that the Cam Ward era is what we will be going into, and that Will Levis is unfortunately going to be a thing of the past. And speaking of things of the past, that brings me to the next item on today's agenda, Traylon Burks. Oh, Traylon. We hardly knew you, mainly because you were hardly on the field, unfortunately. And again, I wish no ill will on anybody injury-wise as it relates to the NFL or really anything, but in particular, the NFL and the Tennessee Titans in this case. But Traylon Burks went down the other day with I believe it was a collarbone injury. And that has really been the story of Traylon Burks' career in many ways, because this man has really never found the ability to stay on the field. And it's unfortunate, even going back to Traylon Burks' first year. And really, this is not even having to do with his injury history. But I remember Traylon Burks' first training camp with the Titans in his rookie year, after the Titans selected him. And that trade, my gosh, the trade that was used to acquire Traylon Burks. Oh, I will be getting into this in short order, because it is unfortunately something that has to be gotten into. But oh my gosh, the issue that Traylon Burks had during the first training camp that he had with the Tennessee Titans was the level of conditioning, or I should say the lack of conditioning that he had, which is and was not particularly a level of conditioning that one is expected to have when you are selected in the first round of the draft and are expected to be the replacement for A.J. Brown. Of all the receivers, we are talking about A.J. Brown, arguably a top 10, if not top 7 or 8 receiver in the NFL. A.J. Brown. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. They actually traded A.J. Brown away to draft this man, when many people leading up into that draft expected the Titans to draft Traylon Burks while simultaneously keeping A.J. Brown. And you know what? On that note, I'm gonna go ahead and get into this trade, because this has been one of the things that, going into the show, I've looked forward to talking about, and at the same time that I have not been looking forward to talking about, because when you go back and you look at this trade that the Titans made with the Philadelphia Eagles, and oh my gosh, what a terrible trade it was. Thank you so much for this trade, J-Rob. Thank you, J-Rob. We very much appreciate you setting us back like this. J-Rob. That's another situation that I don't really have the time to get into today. I'm just going to focus specifically on Traylon Burks. But J-Rob, maybe with this move, the one thing I will say about the Traylon, not even specifically the injury, but the fact that Traylon has been officially released by the Titans, is that maybe this move also means that the curse of J-Rob is now officially over with. Because my J-Rob, whoo, you really did set us back a little bit, Johnny. You really did, and it's painful that is the case. But oh boy, when you look at this trade, the Titans gave up the dominant receiver that is A.J. Brown in exchange for the 18th overall pick, which they used to draft Traylon Burks, and the 101st overall pick, who and this shows how fondly I think of this trade. I do not even remember who the Titans drafted at number 101 overall in that draft. And with the benefit of hindsight, maybe I will not have to go back and look at that trade anymore, because that trade. It is unbelievable just how bad that trade ended up being. Traylon Burks in exchange for A.J. Brown, who not only, in addition to not only being a top 10, if not arguably top 7 or 8 receiver in the NFL, not only is he that, he has also been to the Super Bowl in 2 of the last 3 seasons, of course winning the Super Bowl last season as a member of the Eagles. Been to the Super Bowl 2 out of the last 3 years. Not good, J-Rob. Not good, buddy. Not good at all. Anyway, I guess at this point, I'm going to move on to the last little tidbit as it relates to Traylon Burks before I get to the point where I throw up both inside of my mouth and outside of my mouth. There's been trades that have been bad through the years. You know, you look at the Herschel Walker trade that the Minnesota Vikings made back in the day with the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, the Cowboys were the ones that traded Herschel Walker to the Vikings for a boatload of draft picks, which they used to select, I don't know, Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman. Really helped solidify the Cowboys dynasty that took place in the mid-90s. But, oh my gosh. And another thing that I can compare the Traylon Burks trade to is the trade that I made in fantasy football one year, where I decided to, and a little bit of the backstory at the time, I really needed the wide receiver help, okay? And for some reason, I decided to trade Breece Hall for Zay Jones. Zay Jones, of all people. And if any of you are asking yourselves in your head, Jim, who is Zay Jones? Exactly. And of course, meanwhile, Breece Hall, the guy that I gave up, decided to, and of course this is post Aaron Rodgers injury. And so at the time I was thinking, oh, Aaron Rodgers is hurt, the Jets are going to be sputtering at best on offense. And while in many ways that was the case, because Zach Wilson turned out to be kind of Breece Hall up and decides to transform himself into the second coming of Curtis Martin, staying with the New York Jets theme here, decides to transform into the second coming of Curtis Martin, or the second coming of LaDainian Tomlinson, even when he was a member of the New York Jets. And not a good trade there, Jimothy. And you all in the comment section of this show, or whether it be in the Facebook Live version or the YouTube version, please feel free to rank how bad of a trade that was. But you know, you live and you learn. And the last thing I will say before I move back into the Tennessee Titans discussion of the show is that, knock on wood, I will not be making that mistake again in the future. But feel free to sort of have a laugh at my expense in the comment section, I beg you. But because that is certainly the case with me in hindsight. But enough of that. Moving on to, I guess, as I'm sort of wrapping up the show here, the one thing that I do want to touch on as the Titans move into their preseason opener against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or sort of the main position battles of training camp, the first of which has got to be the wide receiver battle. And of course, I mentioned the impact that the veteran presences of the aforementioned Calvin Ridley that I talked about a little bit earlier in the show, and Tyler Lockett, but also even a veteran presence like Van Jefferson, who is coming home in many ways after having had some experience in the Tennessee area as a standout at Ravenwood High School in the Nashville area. He's, of course, that aside, even a guy like Van Jefferson has been around the league for a few years now, has a little bit of an experience level under his belt to where he can be of value to a rookie quarterback like a Cam Ward. And it's going to be interesting to see what Van Jefferson looks like in the preseason. I've of course heard very positive things about him coming out of Titans training camp so far. But those three aside, I'm really excited about the younger guys, and one of the reasons why I'm especially excited about him is because I did not really expect the Titans to be in a spot to draft him, which is Alec Iamaner, the big-bodied receiver from Stanford, who, going back to a couple of seasons ago, absolutely had his way with a certain number 2 overall draft selection this past year. That, of course, being Travis Hunter. Alec Iamaner just frankly manhandles Travis Hunter. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that tape, go back and I would encourage you to go back and watch Colorado versus Stanford 2023, because that game was impressive in many ways, not just the fact that Stanford came back and beat Colorado after being down 29-0 at one point, but also when you look at Alec Iamaner's tape from that game, dude is all over the place. And he's, like I said, a big-bodied receiver who I've heard can even, if he develops well enough, could even transform into the Titans' number 2 guy opposite of Calvin Ridley, which would, of course, which would be great in many ways for the Titans offense if this is the case. And I'm going to be looking forward to seeing how this materializes in the preseason. But let's just say Alec Iamaner develops, knock on wood, let's just say he develops into that number 2 guy opposite of Ridley. This would, of course, in theory, allow a Tyler Lockett, for example, to move into that slot role, which is something that he is really excellent at in many ways, going back to his long tenure with the Seattle Seahawks and sort of being that security valve for Russell Wilson, who people forget was a Super Bowl winning quarterback in Seattle, now is, of course, with the G-men, of course, in the New York Football Giants. But Tyler Lockett, very productive receiver in Seattle, extremely productive slot receiver in particular. And if Alec Iamaner, who I've no doubt is currently picking the brain of somebody like Tyler Lockett, if Iamaner were to become the number 2 guy, then that, of course, opens up all sorts of very interesting possibilities for the Tennessee Titans offense. And, of course, speaking of things and people that open up very exciting possibilities for the Titans offense. I guess is going to be the last. I guess I should end on this note, because why not end the show on a very exciting note? Gunnar Helm, the rookie tight end from the University of Texas. He is, of course, another guy that excites me, because this is, when you look at Gunnar Helm, this is another guy who I was not anticipating the Titans being in a position to draft. But when you turn on Gunnar Helm's tape with the Longhorns last year, you begin to see why there is a lot to love about him when you look at his ability to be that safety blanket for a Quinn Ewers at Texas, and of course now going forward with Cam Ward. Another thing that excites me about Gunnar Helm is his run after the catch ability. He's a very big-bodied, athletic tight end who sort of reminds you of what you want to see from a tight end in today's game. When you look at guys like, and I'm not trying to compare him to any one of these guys in particular, but when you look at a Travis Kelce, when you look at a George Kittle, when you look at a, just gonna throw out a random name at the top of the tight end tier echelon, Sam Laporta, Jake Ferguson, guys like that. And Jake Ferguson just got that big contract extension as a member of the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm sure Micah Parsons, just to give a little bit of a sidebar, I'm sure that Micah Parsons is wishing he had a little bit of the money that the Cowboys gave to Jake Ferguson right now. But I digress. The Micah Parsons situation is something to get into a little bit later on in further episodes of the show as the preseason and regular season progresses. But Gunnar Helm, again, I did not see the Titans being in a position to draft him, but I'm very much excited that they did, because and really Gunnar Helm is a guy, when you look at the tape, and nothing against Chigoziem Okonkwo, the Titans' other tight end. Maybe the Titans will find a way to utilize both of them over the course of the season offensively, and this may be a little bit of a hot take on my part, but I can see Gunnar Helm possibly overtaking Chig as tight end one, if not, definitely not earlier in the season, but probably a little bit later into the season. I think that the Titans tight end and the wide receiver position, but also the tight end situation is also going to be one to watch. I do see a guy like Josh Wiley being pushed out of that conversation, but time will tell. Time will certainly tell as it relates to who is going to be making the team, who is not going to be making the team, what the depth chart is, and blah, 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 blah. But having said all of that, I can definitely see Gunnar Helm becoming tight end 1 for the Tennessee Titans. And if any of you in the viewing and listening audience have any thoughts or questions or concerns or comments on the tight end situation or the wide receiver situation or any situation as it relates to the Tennessee Titans, please feel free to chime in the comment section about that. But with that being said, I suppose I'm going to wrap up this show today. Again, there are a lot of very exciting things that have been taking place and will take place at Ascension St. Thomas Sports Park over the course of training camp as we go into the preseason. And of course, me as a fan, I cannot look forward more to watching it and seeing it all transpire. It's going to be a very exciting time as we head into the Cam Ward era in Nashville. So get your popcorn ready, ladies and gentlemen. And with all of that being said, that is going to wrap it up for me today. I want to thank you all so much for watching and listening to the season premiere, if you will, of season 2 of the Jim Bratton podcast. I very much appreciate you watching and listening. I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.